Hello again, Jerry Ludlow here. In this video I'll be doing a painting with softened edges to get the effect of a misty morning in a landscape painting. This is Hanningfield in Essex, and I need to edit the photo to make it ready for my painting. The area that I'm going to be using is this area here, just about there. And there's a house there behind the trees which I'm going to use, but I'm going to be bringing it more into view, so the house itself will be probably a bit more to the left, about here. And I shall be covering it with the trees. Maybe not like that, but it will be similar to that. I might just do that, have those trees there, and then move some of these trees there, and then the rest will just be varied heights. I'll also be making the bank more prominent, so that will be more in view there. And I shall be in these bottom corners, I should be putting something to stop the eye just wandering out the bottom there. There'll probably be more water as well, bringing that down there. And there'll be some vegetation here and vegetation here. Here's the cropped version, and you can see the house a bit more clearly. I'm going to be putting the taller trees into the background, very soft, and some of the trees at the front are going to be much more prominent. I'm going to be using quite a lot of wet into wet technique with the trees behind, and also I'm going to be using it with some of the reflections as well, just to soften a lot of the edges. Starting off with the drawing, I'm using Arches 250 pounds rough watercolor paper, and I'm using a 4B pencil, which I prefer to use as it dissolves very readily into the watercolors and is easy to remove with an eraser. With a painting like this, it's really just a few guidelines, putting the horizon line in first, and then the trees and buildings in next. And with the trees, it's nothing more than a few trunks and a rough guide for the size of the tops of the trees. And also the angles of the tree trunks. Taller trees to the left, and they're covering the house. Here's the colours that I use on my palette. Starting from the bottom left is sepia, then Payne's grey, French ultramarine, cobalt blue, cerulean blue, cobalt turquoise, neutral tint, and light red, raw umber, burnt sienna, raw sienna, quinacridone gold, hooker's green and sap green, cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson, opera rose, cadmium red, jaune brilliant, lavender, and I use white and white gouache. Now I'm going to start the painting by putting on quite a lot of water. This Arches 250-pound rough paper is very absorbent, and the brush I'm using is an 1.5" flat brush, so you can get a lot of water on fairly quickly. I'm leaving some areas white so that the paint doesn't run into them, areas like the vegetation to the bottom left and the bottom right. Lots and lots of water, and this is Payne's Grey. Going over the painting quite swiftly. Just going around the areas that I want to leave white, the house and the shoreline. And the same mixture for the water. This will be drying out lighter. Just avoiding the left and right areas. And I'm going to be introducing some French ultramarine to the mixture to make the immediate foreground of the water closest darker. As I said, it will dry very much lighter. The intention here is to make it appear as it would on a misty morning by using wet into wet technique. So I'm just waiting for the paint to dry off slightly. Now when you're doing this, it's very much a case of using your experience of when to actually start painting. I'm just taking out, lightening this edges off a little bit with a dry brush for some of the reflections to show better when I get to use them. But when you're going painting wet into wet like this, just look at the edge, look across the paper to see if it's dried out a bit. And I've just been checking it with the back of my hand. But it will pay you to practice doing this on some scrap sheets of paper till you feel confident. Because what you don't want is the edges spreading too far on these edges. I'm going in now with a wash of the blues Payne's Grey, French Ultramarine again, allowing for it just to spread a little bit. The paper's still quite wet. And the other thing to be mindful of is to use the paint a little bit thicker to avoid the ballooning that you get if you build up too much paint and it's too watery and you're putting too much water on. You can see this now, but this will dissolve into the background and look like trees in the misty distance. Now I'm putting in some other colours just for variety. Some of the earth colours, burnt sienna, raw umber, and then going back to the Payne's Grey mix. It does look quite effective, the darker colours and the warmer colours, the colder colours and the warmer colours. And what I use sometimes is I have a scrap of watercolour paper to hand just to have a look, to see what the colours are coming up like. You can get quite a variety of colour within the same colour just by the amount of water that you're adding to it. Just darkening up the mixture now to be doing the trees that are in front. Using raw umber and burnt sienna. Doing the trees around the house. Quite often when painting foliage like this, it's really just a case of, for me, it's just a case of going around the palette and using what feels like a good combination. While those areas are drying a little bit, just bringing in some dark reflections. When you're doing reflections into water, the dark areas come up lighter in the reflections and vice versa. The light areas come up darker and the dark areas come up lighter in most cases. Water area is still quite damp, working wet into wet again with these reflections. trying to keep the reflection mirroring the what's above it with the trees and the house. The photograph was taken in the winter. Now, I'd actually dried off some of the areas there and moved the video forward just to avoid you seeing the hairdryer drying it off. You can see how the trees in the background now have blended in or melted into the distance, which looks quite effective. And now painting with much more hard edges showing. Using a dry brush effect, which is using the side of the brush with thick paint to get the appearance of foliage, and using colours that will make it appear more in the distance than the brighter coloured trees. Not so many brushes used in this particular painting, just rounds. This is a medium round with a synthetic point. It's quite nice. You get some quite fine lines with it. Moving around the painting, putting in some darks, which would be the waterline. Bringing these leaves and foliage forward even more now with the warm colours and the thicker mixture. Showing very little of the house really. It's just there to add a touch of architecture, a little bit of man-made into the natural world there that it's in. And into the softer grey areas using quite a dark mixture, neutral tint. and using some water, some clean water, to soften the edges. Putting all the leaves in, bushes in first. Some more of the grey colour to the left there, which will take it back a little bit, take it back into the distance just a little bit. Lose the brightness there of that roof on the house. And now using a rigger brush, which is a very fine tip on it, which is good for doing very fine work. Here I'm using it for the trunks and for the branches. I could have used a slightly bigger brush for the trunks, but I decided just to go with the rigger brush and use it on its side. Doing a few dark trunks. And the painting starts to come to life. Varying it a little bit now with some neat raw umber and Payne's grey. I do enjoy this part of it. But I have to restrain myself from doing too many branches. Doing these trees at the back, which still look as though they're quite a bit in the distance with the bluey grey colour that I've done them. Trying to keep it interesting with various trunks and things here and there. You can start to see how the initial washes with the trees in the background and some of the water there being blurred looks quite effective as the stronger colours go on the over the top, and it does look kind of misty. These were those areas that I said I'm going to be putting in just to make it interesting, and also just to stop your eye wandering out the bottom of the painting there, keeping it going towards the centre left, the focal point, which is the house behind the trees. Just using some warm and some dark colours. Raw sienna and neutral tint. They make a nice combination for the foreground, but not leaving the putting in too much at the front there. Just an indication of some grasses. Back to the shoreline. Just putting some darks and along the edge, just to break up that expanse of raw sienna. And some grasses with their reflections. A few more trunks. And just going over the bases of the trunks of the trees on the right hand side there, so they don't appear to be floating in mid-air. Just let that dry. And putting in some more reflections. Using a darker colour. Neutral tint, Payne's grey. Painting is looking fairly subdued, with some bright light on the shoreline and in the foreground. Didn't want to use cold colours all over the painting. And doing some work on these reflections. Going over the edges with clean water, just to soften it, and also tissue. Not too far off completed now. Taking off the masking tape. To reveal the painting with a nice crisp edge. And I've spotted just a couple of bits that need my attention. This is just me fiddling about really. I quite often leave the painting hanging for a couple of days and then go back to it, and I'll alter bits and pieces that weren't obvious when I was actually painting it. There's the finished painting. Thank you for watching the video.